Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be unpacking a really massive technical report on digital value transfer in 2026. If you're a system architect, a fintech developer, or honestly just someone fascinated by the invisible infrastructure moving money around the globe, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this one. We're going to bust the myth that near-field communication, NFC, and QR codes are just direct competitors. Instead, we're diving deep into the physical layers, the cryptography, and how these systems are actually merging to form the financial ecosystems of our future.
So, let me ask you something right off the bat. In the post-quantum era, which payment architecture truly achieves seamless integration across all scenarios? We all get so bogged down in that surface-level consumer debate of tap versus scan. But today, we really need to challenge ourselves to look way past that. We're going to analyze the underlying crypto verification, the offline capabilities, and the ultimate architectural convergence that makes global digital finance actually function.
Here's our blueprint for today's deep dive. We'll start with physical and architecture differences, move into cryptography and offline verification, then global payment ecosystem strategies, hybrid architecture and soft POS, and finally, wrap up with the spatial awareness payment future. Let's jump right in.
All right, Section 1, Physical and Architecture Differences. Let's set the stage by contrasting the foundational engineering philosophies behind these two massive technologies.
When you strip it down to the literal hardware interaction, the differences are pretty stark. On one side, we've got NFC. It operates as a specialized subset of RFID, locked strictly at a frequency of 13.56 MHz. It relies completely on electromagnetic inductive coupling between the initiator, like the point-of-sales terminal, and a target, like your smartphone. Because of the sheer physical constraints of an electromagnetic field, your effective data transmission range is incredibly tight, literally under 4 centimeters. On the flip side, we have the QR code, which is governed by the ISO standard 18004. Fun fact about QR codes, they were originally invented just to track car parts on assembly lines. But today, they rely on advanced computer vision. What makes them an absolute financial powerhouse is their fault tolerance. QR uses Reed-Solomon error correction. That means a visual matrix can still be perfectly decoded even if up to 30% of it is obscured, damaged, or just poorly lit.
Okay, moving up the stack to Section 2, cryptography and offline verification. How exactly do these physical layers handle the heavy lifting of security and tokenization? Let's look at the EMV core.
This breakdown of cryptographic verification is just absolutely fascinating for system architects. Both NFC and dynamic QR rely heavily on payment tokenization. This is absolutely crucial because it ensures the primary account number is never ever sent in plaintext. Instead, a mathematically unrelated token is exchanged. With NFC, a hardware-backed secure element generates a dynamic cryptogram for every single transaction. The math here is really elegant. The cryptogram is an HMAC hash of the session key and the transaction data. After that, the terminal's EMV kernel validates it. And by 2026, we're seeing the massive widespread adoption of elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC. Why ECC? Well, in the looming post-quantum era, ECC gives us the mathematical armor of those massive RSA keys, but at a fraction of the file size. This drastically reduces the computational overhead on edge devices while giving us bulletproof resistance against replay attacks.
Now, when we look at everyday retail scenarios, the technology you select drastically impacts the user experience, mostly through latency. Historically, NFC had a huge advantage here because it uses hardware-level interrupts and dedicated radio frequency polling loops. It processes handshakes in under 150 milliseconds. QR traditionally lag behind because of camera autofocus and weird lighting. But check out these numbers. Thanks to neural processing units, or NPUs, running algorithmic optimizations right on the device, optical decoding for QR has plummeted to under 20 milliseconds. So for the user standing at the retail checkout counter, that old friction of waiting for a camera to focus, that's completely gone.
But here's a big question. What happens when the internet goes down? This brings us to the offline conundrum. In the past, if a merchant presented a QR code, the consumer's phone needed immediate internet access to push that payment through. NFC always had the edge with its native offline authentication. But that gap has essentially closed. The introduction of dense optical payload protocols now allows merchants to encode localized cryptographic proofs directly into dynamic QR matrices. When you combine that with Central Bank Digital Currencies and the localized secure enclaves on modern smartphones, QR codes can now execute true dual offline transactions. It's a real game changer.
That brings us to Section 3,
global payment ecosystem strategies. Let's zoom out from the terminal and look at how these technical foundations dictate macroeconomic deployment around the world. Navigating this space requires balancing some pretty complex architectural trade-offs. Ultimate superiority doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right? It depends entirely on regional infrastructure, regulatory frameworks, and what consumer hardware is already out there. We're essentially watching a massive global standoff between hardware-centric and software-centric models.
Let's break those regional strategies down. In the Americas and Europe, we see a tokenized NFC hegemony. Legacy credit card infrastructure was so deeply entrenched there, so the transition just naturally flowed to EMV chip and PIN and then to NFC, tightly coupled to global networks like Visa and MasterCard. Mega ecosystems like Apple Pay mandate high capital expenditure for merchants who need those certified EMV terminals. But in stark contrast, the Asia-Pacific region basically leapfrogged traditional point-of-sale hardware entirely. Led by giants like Alipay and WeChat, the APAC strategy is hyper-inclusive and software-centric, relying heavily on ISO optical standards. A merchant's hardware cost is literally zero. The massive takeaway for you as an architect, these wildly different regional standards, EMV chip and PIN in the West versus ISO QR in the East, create some severe compatibility bottlenecks for global cross-border settlement systems.
Moving right along to Section 4, Hybrid Architecture and Soft POS. So, as a developer, your immediate challenge is system integration. How do you bridge disparate APIs and hardware states across such a fragmented ecosystem? The answer is hybrid architecture. Bridging this hardware gap requires an incredible engineering workaround. Enter soft POS. These are terminal-agnostic, software-backed solutions. They literally transform off-the-shelf smartphones into combined NFC receivers and QR optical scanners. Instead of buying a proprietary single-purpose EMV terminal, the merchant's own smartphone magically becomes the entire checkout infrastructure. For enterprise strategists, soft POS is an absolute masterstroke. By relying heavily on robust back-end risk engines and dynamic token rotation, it completely eliminates those old merchant hardware barriers. You drop your capital expenditure to near zero, while simultaneously maximizing consumer inclusion. Why? Because you can seamlessly accept both the Western NFC tab and the Eastern QR scan from a single unified software layer.
Finally, let's hit Section 5, Spatial Awareness Payment Future. Let's look ahead to the late 2020s, where the hardware interaction itself is about to completely vanish.
Think about how all this builds into the spatial computing era. Ultra-Wideband, or UWB, is going to completely rewrite the hardware verification flow. We are moving away from active tapping and moving toward intent-based payments. Your device is securely located within centimeters using UWB, and the transaction just executes passively as you walk through a physical node. Meanwhile, augmented reality glasses will passively scan environmental QR matrices. The smartphone itself, as a physical payment interface, is literally being abstracted away.
And that brings us to the core thesis of this whole report. The dichotomy between NFC and QR is no longer a battle of obsolescence. It's a symbiotic duality. NFC remains the gold standard for high-throughput, hardware-secured transactions. QR codes remain the ultimate democratizer of digital finance with infinite flexibility. The real victory for digital architects lies in fluidly integrating both interfaces into a unified, secure, and completely invisible value transfer layer.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The ultimate payment architecture isn't about eliminating one technology in favor of another. It's about invisible fusion. As spatial computing, post-quantum cryptography, and global interoperability all converge, ask yourself, is your back-end settlement system actually ready for this hybrid future? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep optimizing, and I'll see you next time.